Welcome everyone to Politically High Tech with your host, Elias. Guess what? You can even blame me for even demanding this guest to come back. Oh, we actually agreed. Because I think he was great. I mean, 2 episodes worth of him being hypercharged, not just hypercharged. People could be hypercharged and be silly and nonsensical. This one here has a lot of historical, Christian wisdom. I don't know, I could go on for 2 hours like that. I'm practically half his age. After like 2 hours of that, my brain will be mush, fried, and I'll be speaking gobbledygook. Okay, but blah, 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 after like 3 hours in. Oh, everybody, how he's to recharge. This coming from someone who's at least half of his age. Trust me, he don't look it, but he young, energy, spirit-wise, okay? He is young. All right, he could do a Joe Rogan thing, speak for 3 hours straight. I'm sure he'll do that no problem. You know, his average interviews are 3 hours long. I'm not sure I could even do that. That's why I'm developing these vocal and mental muscle, if you will. But enough of my self-disparaging. We're going to talk about, I'm bringing a little bit of the random element, but we have a starting point. I think a good starting point is post-election / pre-inauguration. Okay, I'm going to repeat that again. Post-election, pre-inauguration. And you know what? I think we can even talk about even a couple of Trump picks. Some are, wild, and some are questionable, depending what camp you are. And if you like it, it's exciting, right? But I'm going to try to keep this as neutral as possible. So I'm going to introduce a returning guest. Very, very popular. The most popular as of now. Brother Gregory. Okay? The reason why he's super popular for obvious reasons. 2 great episodes. 2 great episodes. I'll link them right there. I'll link it in the description, okay? If you want to watch them. Because this is the 3rd episode. 2nd interview, 3rd episode, okay? There's a reason why he has come back. If someone's super great, I see it, I'm going to go for it. The only way it's not going to happen is the person either ignores me, don't want to do it anymore. Look, I can't force anybody. You want me to put a gun through the screen and just force the person to come and say, yo, you better come into my podcast? No, I can't do that. Even if I wanted to, I'm not going to do that. That's ungodly, by the way. Not respecting the person's free will. So anyway, let's reintroduce. For those of you who haven't paid attention, it's the first time.
But they were descending into a totalitarian dictatorship where the people were so weak they couldn't get rid of the corruption in the Roman government. Once you understand what they were actually doing in history, you can tell what the future is. But just before we started talking, and the theme is, post-election and pre-inauguration, I pointed out on one of our shows just recently, after the election that, he's not elected president. The Electoral College has to meet, and they're the ones who actually elect him as president. It's not popular vote yet. They want to do away with the Electoral College. I think that would be a really bad idea. But what I think is a really good idea is people start understanding what is required to have a free government and what is required to prevent corruption from creeping into your government. Because it's crept in for a lot of years. I've been around for a lot of years, but corruption is galloping. And, what's going to happen? You're 22 bullet away from losing Trump. You lose Trump, it's going to change the game. But again, like I said, the game is not going to save you. We're not out of the woods yet. People have to start understanding how a free government actually operates. And that operates when most of the responsibility of governing is back in the hands of the people. Now, Trump talks about that, education department leaving the federal government and going back to the states. But, I know a lot of people in the state governments, and they're pretty corrupt. So that, giving it back to the states, giving it back to the counties. I have a son who's county commissioner in this Lake County here. He knows all the other commissioners all over the whole state, and they're not above corruption. And one of the most dangerous things is a lot of people don't realize that they are corrupt because they have corrupt ideas they think are good, they think are moral, they think are okay. And like you were just saying, that if you can't coerce people into coming onto your podcast, you can't take away their right to choose. Well, this is what Christ was restoring when he restored the kingdom. A lot of people don't know that. They think the kingdom was postponed.
Brother Gregory, what do you want the listeners and the viewers to know about you?
Well, the first one of the first shows that we did together, there was one place in there I was throwing out chunks of information that most people are unaware of concerning the Bible, concerning what the Bible was really all about, and a lot of religious texts are about, but you wouldn't know that by talking to people who preach the Bible. The idea, like I said, that one of the first guys to translate the Bible, Wycliffe, in the forward, it says, "This is a book for the government of the people, for the people, and by the people." The Bible is actually telling you how to become free, stay free, and gives you lots of warnings about things you don't want to do as a society that will take your liberty and freedom away. And you wouldn't know that going to churches. I went to seminaries. I was going to a seminary back in the 60s, and they weren't teaching me that. But there's so much in our history that we don't know. We just saw, Trump was elected, since that's part of the topic. We'll bounce off of that. He was elected the first time. And the Washington establishment was doing every single thing it could to cripple his time in office. And he had he hired a lot of different people to be in his cabinet and to be part of his team. And a lot of them were really bad choices. And he's probably making some bad choices now, but he's got an awful lot of people that are thinking out of the box. I mean, he's got two prominent Democrats that were promoting him. Actually, Joe Rogan was a Democrat. He voted for Bernie Sanders. So there's a lot of people that were Democrats that are now supporting Trump. But the idea that Trump is going to do away with the corruption in Washington, D.C., he's going to drain the swamp, that's nobody's going to do that. It's absolutely impossible. And there is so much corruption. It's so deep. This is kind of the way it was when Jesus Christ came back in, the early days of Herod. He was born, and the early days of the Roman Empire. Augustus Caesar was the first Caesar of Rome. Now, Rome had been around for 400, 500 years, but it, as a imperial power and a democratic socialist type government, most people don't know the emperors were elected to office by an electoral college, at least at the beginning. No, there was millions of people who became Christians, and they were taking care of all the social welfare in an international network of charity that operated locally and internationally without a central treasury, and made it through the decline and fall of the Roman Empire. A lot of people didn't become Christians. Some people were sympathetic to the Christians. Some people were supportive of the Christians. But what they were actually doing, most people don't even know. That they don't teach you if you go to the seminary. They don't teach you they don't even teach you what the conflict was between the Christians. They talk about martyrs and all this kind of stuff. Christians were extremely successful, and they were thriving even when the Roman Empire was collapsing. But the people who got into trouble, the people who are persecuted, they get all the press. And of course, the churches hold those up. Those are the martyrs and all this. But a lot of Christians weren't martyred. They were protected. They were they were held in high esteem. And eventually Rome, 300 years after Christ, Rome emulated what Christianity was doing with some minor changes that have made a major difference and has really brought us all back into systems of corruption. You go to Germany, you can go to France, you can go to, I hear a lot goes on in Sweden because my daughter-in-law is from Sweden. Great Britain, I have a son-in-law from Great Britain. We have people in our network from Australia. So the corruption is everywhere, and the people are such a scattered flock that all they can do is complain about it on Facebook and YouTube. And if you do too much of that, somebody censors you. So, yeah, the solution is that you have to create a network of people outside of the controlled media, outside of the public institutions, and you have to bind that network of people together by something that creates bonds that don't break under extreme stress, because there's billions and billions, trillions of dollars at stake. If Trump gets in and does half the things that he says he wants to do, as fortunes are going to start slipping, and a vast amount of power and control is going to start slipping out of the hands of the corrupt swamp. You can call it a swamp, the cabal, whatever. And
Deep state.
the deep state. Yeah, there's lots of different names for it. And nobody can really put their finger exactly on what it is, because it isn't necessarily some guy, in a big mansion petting a white cat. It's a spirit that dwells in people who don't mind forcing their neighbor, don't mind taking away the choice of their neighbor. They think that's perfectly okay. They think it should be within their power to control the unwashed masses. And this has really been the battle. You go back to Edmund Burke. You can go back, at the beginning of the Enlightenment age, pre-Jefferson, and even during Jefferson, they're talking about these inalienable rights, and they're trying to create institutions that protect those rights. And really, the fundamental spirit or essence of a free nation is either written in the people or not. If it's not written in the people, those people will be manipulated. Christ referred to it as they dwell in darkness. They just can't see the danger. And we just saw that, millions of people did vote for Kamala. Millions of people did vote for Biden. I don't think we had honest elections. But with mail-in ballots, I don't think we've had an honest election here in Oregon since they brought in mail-in ballots. Has it always made a difference? Well, there hasn't been a Republican elected to governor in Oregon since they went to mail-in ballots. And they don't have to do it. I'm in a little county. There's only like 8,000 people. Well, actually, it's one of the biggest counties, but there's only 8,000 people in this county. So we literally know all the voters. So there's nobody's stealing the vote in this county. But you go up to the metropolitan area counties, Portland, Eugene, Salem, you don't know. You could actually watch where all of a sudden at midnight, huge volumes of votes started shifting. And we saw this in many other states. But there was such an overwhelming support for Trump because there's this backlash. But the amount of stupid things that they allowed Kamala to do, the fact she seemed to be put in place as the sacrificial lamb. They wanted Trump in office. They didn't want the powers that be did not want Kamala in office. They didn't care. Oh, they would have worked harder. They would have picked somebody different. They're not absolutely insane, but that's what they did. Maybe you can just say they're all stupid, but I don't think so. I think the guys that are really pulling the strings, they want Trump in power because they're going to pull something else. And probably won't work to pull another pandemic. But the banking system and the money system, that is under a lot of danger. And there's terrorist groups in California and Pennsylvania. They've taken over hotels, motels, apartments. They have guns there, and nobody's doing anything about it. Been brought to the attention of the authorities in California, I know, and they don't do anything about it. Should be, I could tell you that if it was a bunch of white supremacists, they would have raided those places already. But you don't even hear about it on the news. So they've got some sort of plan. Exactly what it is, I don't know. But the solution is to create a network of people who care about your life, your rights, their neighbor's rights, their neighbor's life, their neighbor's children, as much as they care about their own. If you gleaned everybody in America who has that spirit and you counted them up, it might only be 5, 10, 20% of Americans. I mean, right now we saw in North Carolina when they had the hurricane, all these people showed up from everywhere and they really made a difference. It wasn't FEMA was saving anybody. It's clear that FEMA was actually a detriment in many ways, even with all the money that's thrown into that. But the people showed up for each other. But those people who showed up, their family wasn't hungry at home. There hadn't been a bank collapse. There wasn't wide power outages over a third of the nation or half of the nation. We get a situation like that, and it's going to be really difficult. So the sooner you create that network of people who actually not only care about one another as much as they care about themselves, care about one another's rights as much as they care about their own. You create an intimate network of people who do that. Create your own systems. You know, my aide that was helping us set up this, because I moved to a different computer, he could set up all the cell phones in the valley so that they all talk to one another, and he could do it in short order. He could write the software himself. We have a lot of skilled people out there that can do all kinds of things, but they're a scattered flock. They have to learn to come together. And that's what Christ was teaching. You wouldn't know that. Christ only commanded his disciples, his student ministers, one time. He commanded that they organize the people in the tens, hundreds, and thousands. If you go back in history, the most predominant form of free government throughout the whole history of man, that, you know, our recorded history, is the tens, hundreds, and thousands. People during World War II, the French underground organized in the same fashion.
Yep.
They
So
would have
let me
cell
come
groups.
just a second,
Go ahead.
because you said a lot of important points.
Okay.
The community seems to be the antidote against, corruption. I love that message. I want to emphasize something, because a lot of people, look, putting your hopes in the president is a form of idolatry, correct?
It's a dangerous concept, because no
but
matter where you
sadly,
are in
some
the
people
present,
do.
it's going to change.
Right. Sadly, a lot of people do. And I think the media, both the left and the right, has that concept for whatever, champions their ideas or whatever. So I like that. Build a community of people who cares about the community and others instead of just themselves.
The COVID thing actually started waking that up in a lot of people, but they didn't know what to do. They didn't have the connections. To have such a community, you have to build trust on a local basis. Like you were talking about a lot of the choices that Trump's making. A lot of these people that he's pulling out, I don't know a lot of those people. They're far away. I do know people that are in government, and I can check with them and find out what they think about them. They may have met them, but I haven't met them. And that's what a network has to do. And you start learning who you can trust. The word community comes from the same source as the word communion. The early church communion wasn't a wafer of bread. I can show you gatherings of Christians, 100 AD, 150 AD. They were bundles of grain, shiploads of grain. They were sacks of bread that were being distributed. There were dearths or famines that were running across the Roman Empire because of that corruption. And then there were volcanic eruptions like Vesuvius, in Pompeii, and Hyrcanus before that. These are major seaport towns. There were other problems that would be coming up in the next 200-300 years, foreign invasions, etc., disrupting economies, disrupting the flow of grain. People were going to starve. But Christians, we see right out of the box, were bringing shiploads of grain to places and caravanning grain into places. And then when there had to be evacuations of an area, like Pompeii, we know there were Christians living in Pompeii. We know that some of the Christians, you can only tell how many, some of them, because they're only excavating some of them, but we know in some of the excavation sites, we know there was a Christian baker who lived there. And we know it by a lot of reasons. I won't go into all the detail. But he knew he had to get out of town days before Vesuvius erupted, because he was actually taking stuff off the wall. He was packing stuff up. There were things that were in that bakery shop that had just left. And he got out of town. He got out of Dodge, so to speak. How did he know to get out? How did he know? Where did he go to? Did he have some place that he could go to? Well, that was the thing, is that Christianity, right out of the box, had a network of Christians that were in touch with one another through those tens, hundreds, and thousands all over the Roman Empire and beyond. And they had bonds that they were creating because, when they had problems in Syria, people in Corinth sent food by way of this network. Galatia sent money through Corinth and through Paul to Jerusalem to buy grain and move it through Ephesus over to other people. They were creating bonds and connections all over the Roman Empire. And so when Christians had to evacuate a particular area, either because of volcanoes or earthquakes or invasions, they had a place to go. They had contacts in those other places. We just did a show on X. You talk about long shows. I think it was 5 hours. And it was at the end of the day when I'm often getting a little bit more tired. But we still have that up on our His Church X site that you can go listen to the recording. We had over 500 people on the call. But a lot of them had a lot of different ideas and opinions. And this is why we put all of our recordings up, all of our articles up, all of our books are up for free, because there's an awful lot of information that people don't have. Like, how do you organize a free church? How do you, because most churches are not free, they're corporations. One of the things that just came out about a week and a half ago is that people were sending food and supplies, clothing, because people lost everything in North Carolina. And they were sending them to schools and other public buildings to be distributed to the needy. And FEMA came in and confiscated it all. And what they didn't do is they didn't confiscate what was sent to churches. Now they will when things get really bad. But if you properly organized your church, and we talked about this on the last X call, and I brought it up on I have at least 5 hours of broadcast, or anywhere between 3 and 5 hours of broadcast on Saturday, every Saturday in different stations. And then we make them all available through our network. We have a network at preparingyou.com and hisholychurch.org that you can join. And it's based on geography. If you join in Texas, you'll be on the Texas group. But the Texas group is tied to the Florida group and tied to the Australian group. And so, because you have that tens, hundreds, and thousands. But the important thing is that really there's a certain ideology with the idea of caring about other people's rights, but you create the bonds, the trustworthy bonds, by actually providing that communion, that welfare. Unfortunately, or fortunately, however you want to look at it, most of the people that are in the network now are fiercely independent. They almost never need help. They've changed their diet. They're all pretty healthy people. Most of the time, we're helping people that aren't in the network. But hopefully the network will grow. But this is what the early church was doing. This is what Moses was doing. He was teaching the people how to take care of one another so that they didn't have to go to Pharaoh. So they didn't need a central bank. And they were taller, stronger, healthier. Their families were more united. If you look at what Judea was doing at the time of Christ, that was not what Moses had told them to do. Pile up stone and burn up sheep. Moses never said to do that. There's nothing in the Bible that should let you think that Moses was out there piling up rocks and burning up sheep, but everybody does, because we're told that's what it says. Well, we show you that's not what it says. And we can break down a lot of those misconceptions. Same with the government. You don't necessarily want to be a citizen of the United States. You want to be an American. There was no citizen of the United States in 1850. Nobody said they were a citizen of the United States. They were a citizen of the individual states. And the states were as foreign to each other as Mexico is to Canada. That's right out of the Supreme Court.
Yep.
Most people don't know
I think
that.
we still have that. I think we still have that pride today. Oh, I'm a New Yorker. Oh,
Yeah. And I don't know what that means. Well, here we got the gay community. They're, I guess, LGBTQ, whatever. They've got these initials, and they call it a community. They have no communion. They're not taking care of one another. They're not providing for one another. They just online community. If there was a shortage of food, they're not going to come to each other's aid, because they all depend on the government for their communion, their welfare, their Social Security, their disability, or whatever, their transgender operation. If you want a transgender operation, the transgender should get together and pay for it. If you want an abortion, the abortion community should pay for it. Why are you making people that want to have their children and don't want to have an abortion pay for your abortion? It's because we've turned the government into our priests. They're the ones who distribute the communion of the federal government. And now we got Trump going into office saying, well, you're not going to have a federal educational department. They're all, what is it? They all dread the Doge. They're afraid of the Department of Government Efficiency that is going to start cutting back, and you have to. I mean, Elon said it. You can't just keep spending more than you got coming in. Of course, we should have realized this about 50 years ago.
exactly.
Because
this is
right
why I
now you're
criticize
being
Republicans even
taxed.
more. Right.
You're being taxed by inflation. And you think we've had inflation bad? Well, they can control inflation to a certain degree, but we've got countries all over the world that are starting to bail on the U.S. dollar, and it could suddenly make all kinds of things extremely expensive. And but they're not going to take this Trump win sitting down. They've got a plan, and they're going to disrupt either the economy, politics in general. They're not going to have necessarily the control of the Senate and the Congress, but they're still out there, sticking their finger in the pie and mixing around. But it is great to see Americans starting to wake up. Starting to wake up. A lot more waking up they got to do. I mean, you can't even cover it all. Um, and that's why you can't be slothful in this. You have to try to learn how you create a community, uh, not only on a local basis, but on a national and international basis. And you have to create bonds in that community that actually mean something. And I don't know if we have enough time to do it. I think it will take a miracle to save us. And Trump being in office, do not get giddy that that's going to save you. It's not going to save you. The corruption is far deeper than you imagine. And unfortunately, a lot of that corruption is in us. And even though we can be nice to one another now and say, yeah, we care about this, one of the big pet peeves I have with the modern church is that I think you can love your neighbor sitting in a pew. No, you want to love your neighbor. You got to get out there. The network I'm talking about, you know who you can trust. Because you have a relationship with them, but you're not just looking at your little neighborhood network. With what I see coming down the line, it's going to get a lot worse before it gets better. And that's another reason why I warn people about this giddiness. We got Trump in, he's doing all these things, he's planning all this stuff. Of course, if you're in the I hate Trump club side of the equation, well, then you can titillate your feelings because you imagine that he will fail. Well, I think he will ultimately fail because it's too much. He just not going to be able to do it. No, I'm not doubting his sincerity. I'm not doubting that he's got a lot of smart guys following him and going to be working with him. But the enemy has been at this for a long time. They're not just going to flee away in the darkness. They're going to pull something else.
Yeah, let me
So,
interrupt for a second. I think you said something very important that I think needs to be reemphasized. Just because you elect your favorite person, it doesn't mean it's resolved. The battle has really just begun, if anything. This is just stage one. And just like you said, there's going to be ways to throw curveballs. And you already said that the system is so corrupt that it's impossible for a team, if you will, him and his team, to clean house. I mean, you could do some, but
well,
you know,
they're certainly going to make waves and make a difference. And I've already seen. I mean, you've already seen on the international scope of things that a lot of the saber rattling and I think the Ukraine war, that wasn't a war on anything but the United States and the Ukraine. No, almost nobody even knows why Russia is trying to stop what was going on in the Ukraine. And we could get into that, the geopolitics of that and everything, but you could have avoided that war easily. And without a loss of all the lives that we've seen, I know people from the Ukraine. That you did, it's all you did is kill Ukrainian people, make a lot of the corrupt people in Ukraine rich, They've got all their money other places like France and Switzerland and all that stuff. It was one of the most corrupt governments to begin with because it was far too socialist. Whenever you have a socialist government, you start getting corrupt people. Sweden has started to realize that, but and they rolled back their socialism. It used to be their social security. I mean, you could owe more taxes in Sweden so that the tax amount that you owed was more than you actually brought in back in the 60s and 70s. And they realized this isn't going to work. So they privatized a great deal of their social welfare. That you're actually a member of a private social security system. They still have the number. You still have to, that your social security number is your badge of servitude. If you look in the Bible, they talk about revelations. Everybody thinks, they're going to come up with a mark of the beast, where you'll get a number from the beast, and they always are telling you won't be able to buy or sell if you don't have that number. It doesn't say that. It says you might not be able to buy or sell. That they will cause that you might not be able to buy or sell. Then you have to look at the idiom that it means enter into the marketplace. You don't have a social security number, you can't have a bank account. You can't get a job. You're not going to have a debit card or a credit card. They're making it so that you won't be able to fly. If you look at Title 42, Section 666 of the United States Codes, it says that you can't get a license to drive, a license to marry, a license to be a doctor. You can't be a barber without a social security number. That's what Title 42, Section 66 says and has said for quite a while in the United States. You're not going to be able to get your national ID. You won't be able to get on a plane, supposedly. But it's actually causing that you might not be able to buy or sell. But if there's a major power outage around the planet, which is very possible, if there's bank collapse, dollar collapse, where a loaf of bread is $500, you don't think we can get to that? A sack of wheat in Rome at the time of Jesus Christ, which was 30 pounds, a modius of wheat. They could lift more than 30 pounds, but their sacks weren't that good. But that would normally be a modius of wheat was 30-pound bag of wheat. It was 6 denarii. That's like 6 times, 60 cents for 30 pounds. By the time Diocletian came along, it was 120,000 denarii. Why? Because there's no more silver in the denarii. They had runaway inflation and price controls, all things that Kamala was talking about, price controls. You could actually, some of their price controls on the shipping markets, it carried the death penalty. But it didn't work because they had removed valuable money from circulation. They'd gone off the silver and gold standard. And of course, we did that back in the 30s and 70s. So, we're way down the road of corruption. And a lot of the corruption isn't even the corrupt politicians in Washington, D.C., or the corrupt bureaucrats in Washington, D.C. 1961, William O. Douglas, who was a Supreme Court judge, said that New George III is the vast bureaucracy that regardless of who you elect, stays in place. That's what Trump is going to try to do, is remove some of that bureaucracy. It's so big. It's millions of people that are going to be looking for a job. And they're not going to look for a job that you have to work at. They're going to look for a job like the one they've had, working for the government, where you don't necessarily have to work that hard in many government jobs. So that we knew that back in 61 We were told that, but we didn't do anything about it. If you go back to the 50s and the 40s, people were dividing communities then because if you went, let's go back to the 20s, and I've seen this in small towns, and I've lived in small towns, big cities, and all this stuff. But if somebody got sick, everybody in town was going to do something for that guy if they liked him. If they didn't like him, they would even make sure that he didn't starve. But even in the small town south of us, because I don't live in town, we have a town that is about 40 miles away, and it's only got 300 people in it. So I'm out in the sticks, out in the woods, so to speak, except we're on the desert. But if somebody got sick or had an operation and came home and couldn't fend for themselves very well, their big problem is, what are they going to do with all the food everybody in town brings over to your house? And so the women got smart, and they cook in shifts. He will not have to fix any food for his recovery. And that, because they have this small town view of things, they're going to help you out. In the cities, you could die in your apartment and nobody's going to knock on your door until the stench gets so bad that somebody calls somebody else to come and check on you. Because we're a scattered flock. We're not communities. We're not working together anymore because we've looked to the government. 150 years before Christ was even born, historian of historians wrote that when the people develop an appetite for benefits and the habit of receiving them by the rule of force and violence, at the expense of others, they will institute the rule of force and violence and degenerate into perfect savages, finding once more a monarch and a king. There's a little bit more to it, but that's the basics of it. And that was written, I've quoted it in books, I've quoted it in articles. The greatest destroyers of liberty, this was written at the time of Christ by Plutarch, is he who spreads amongst them gifts, gratuities, and benefits. If you want to weaken a society, you give it free bread and circuses. And that's going to weaken the people, divide the people. Because if you're not taking care of one another, you're isolating yourself. You're not going to create those bonds of trust. And that's what the early church started doing. That was the chief complaint that Jesus had with the Pharisees. Their system of sacrifice had moved from free will offerings, which is what it says in the Old Testament, to forced offerings. In other words, taxation. They were taxing the people to provide social welfare. If you do that, you're going to destroy your society. Historians have told us this time and time again throughout the centuries. The Bible is full of it. In 1099, I got a book here. The cover of the book has Lady Godiva on it. I'll hold it up to the camera. She's fully dressed. That's Lady Godiva there. She never took off her clothes. She never rode through the streets naked. She took off her wealth. That the king wanted to impose a tax on the people to go to the church, so the church would take care of the needy of the people, and they'd be funded by taxation. And she said, we can't do that. It'll destroy the nation. She knew this way back then. She was the richest woman in Great Britain. She's the only woman that's mentioned in what they call the Doomsday Book, which is the books of the land surveys that are done by the king when the land falls under the authority of the king. Another long story, but anyway, that's the Free Church report. Her picture's on it because she said, no, if we don't take care of the needy of our society through charity, we will degenerate as a society. We will lose our communion, our community. We will end up not trusting one another. We will become the translation says perfect savages. That's what Polybius calls us. But
Yeah,
what it
let
means
me.
is we become
Yeah,
this scattered flock. Go ahead.
yeah. Not so. I was gonna say is this is a very valuable lesson. So we've been taught this. Obviously, it's fell on deaf ears.
Well, it has been
or
taught.
or we
It's
just
been
or we just
removed from
ignorant.
your school books.
Right.
Out my shop, I have a collection of school books that goes the whole wall length. And when I was collecting them, I'm reading these books to figure out how to teach my own children because my kids were home taught. We don't send our kids to public school. The only time my kids went to public school was to teach other kids. And, uh, but they've never been to school. Actually, I had one daughter that went on to college for a little bit, but uh, she actually runs the local school now. So pretty much. But the reality is that it was in there and it was taught. I ended up going to private schools. I'd never been to public school either when I was growing up. But I've read old history books. I've got history books that go way back, and they change the way we look at history. We don't know our own history. We don't know how a free society works. And it's interesting there. I probably can't remember it exactly, but Augustus Caesar wrote that because he was one of the most instrumental leaders that moved Rome from a republic to an indirect democracy and an imperial totalitarian dictatorship. Many of the programs he put in place was going to change Romans. Now, Julius Caesar was doing it before, but he never became the actual emperor. The day he thought he'd go down and get his crown, they stabbed him a bunch of times. And not the solution either. The solution is that people have to take back their responsibilities. If you want your rights, you have to take back your responsibilities. Because the way it works now is that, oh, we want government benefits. Well, now absolutely lazy, immoral, drug addict people who won't change their diet, won't do anything for their health, won't do anything to make themselves a better person, they're on the government dole, and you have to pay for it. That was the plan of people like Cloward and Pibbin, who have planned to bankrupt America through its social welfare system. They wrote books about it. That was their plan, to bankrupt America. They were a part of getting as many people on welfare as they possibly could, because it would eventually break down the family, bankrupt America, and then they could bring in communism, totalitarian control. Then they wrote about it. And these are college professors. And they visited Obama in the White House many times. The newspaper people didn't tell you that his best friends wanted to destroy America and been writing a plan on how to do it for 40 years. I mean, their books are available. We've got articles that preparing you give you just a glimpse of what they were planning. But that's the plan. Break down the family, break down community, make people dependent upon the government. And so the way you do that is people develop an appetite for benefits and the habit of receiving them at the expense of others, depending for their livelihood on the property of others. That was another one of that's more on the line of the actual quote. And then instituting the rules, the institutions or rules of force and violence. John the Baptist came along and said, no, you don't do it that way. If you have an extra coat and your neighbor has none, you share with them. Do the same with meats. You do it through voluntary, because that's how you create those bonds of trust. Now, there's a lot of people out there that won't want to do that, but that's what the Christians were doing, and that's why they were hated. The problem today is most of the Christians go to the government for their social welfare. They go to the government for their free bread. They go to the government for their health care. And Jesus said it was not to be that way with us. He said it in Matthew, he said it in Mark, he said it in Luke. You're not to be like the governments of the Gentiles who call themselves benefactors, but exercise authority one over the other. Well, that's what modern Christians are doing. I've got a bunch of people showing up tomorrow to talk to me about organizing their existing church as a free church, as a church that doesn't do that. And, I've spent the last 50 years figuring out how to do that. If you go to, actually, I'll talk about it on the radio broadcast tomorrow. I'll bring it up. So many things that were in the Bible are symbolic. I said it earlier in this show that we weren't to, Moses wasn't telling people to pile up rocks, kill sheep, and set them on fire. That isn't what he was telling people to do. He was telling people how to he didn't tell them to build a temple made out of stone. He told them not to do that. As a matter of fact, when they built the tabernacle, they weren't even supposed to go to the tabernacle and worship. Sing songs at the tabernacle or whatever they think worshiping is. They were to worship from the door of their own tents. I mean, it says over and over again in the Old Testament, he was returning every man to the family and every man to his possessions. What Coward and Piven and the communists want to do is break down the family and take all your possessions so that you have nothing and you still are happy, except where you won't be happy. But they paint a smile on your face or something like that.
But that's what they sell. That's the propaganda that they sell them, of course.
Yeah. But it's not going to work because the ultimate goal is that most of you be dead. They don't want 7 billion people, 8 billion people on the planet. They're telling you, oh, we'll all starve, bro. We're using up our natural resources. It's amazing. This guy like Elon Musk comes along and he says, no, the resources are fine. We have to conserve them, but they're fine. Now, I wouldn't take everything that he says as gospel, but he is a pretty smart guy. And he thinks that we're facing population collapse, and anybody who actually studies it, he's absolutely right. And now with, billions of people inoculated with this vaccine, which we wrote about before it was even on the market. We told you, because I read the peer-reviewed published statements from people like Suzuki on Preparing You. You can look it up. That this was going to be devastating to try to vaccinate into a so-called pandemic. I don't think it was that severe of a pandemic. It was about as bad as a bad flu year. And it wouldn't have even been that bad if we were paying attention to our health. And those topics are coming up with people like Kennedy and the brother, Kelly and Kylie or whatever it is, means. They're super bright people telling you that you are poisoning yourselves. They're poisoning you, but you're voluntarily putting these foods into your mouth, and you think they're good for you, or you think that they taste okay. That it's killing Americans. It's killing your children, and our death rate in America is just ridiculous. We're supposed to be this, and our health rate, 70% of the young men in America are unfit for military service. Well, with what's coming in the future, we'll be back to the militia again, and the militia. That's another thing. People don't even know what a militia is. A militia, according to the U.S. codes, includes every able-bodied man between the ages of 17 and 45. That's what the code says. You're already in the militia. If you're between 17 and 45 and theoretically able-bodied, you're already in the militia. Well, for the last 20, 30 years, they've been feeding your children so that 70% of your men, young men, are not able-bodied. And how many kids have autism? How many kids have autoimmune diseases? That's the plague, and they're not talking about it. If you look at the data, that's the plague. But all that's reversible. Now, it may take generations before we can reverse all of it. But if you gather together, there are people who know what you can do for your health. You talk about, I'm 3/4 of a century old plus, and I was out working out in the field today. I moved a ton of concrete mix and Portland cement yesterday by myself. Took it out in the desert, loaded it into a storage unit out there because I have to pour a slab, and I'm going to already hauled, a couple tons of gravel, but I got to haul more. But here I am talking to you. And then I'll be up tonight, or tomorrow night, I'll probably be up on another X call for 3 or 4 hours. The first time I went to a bunch of local ministers, they had them gathered. It was 10 hours before they were wore out. And I was the one doing all the talking. So where do I get all that energy? Actually, I did eat something today, but normally this is about the time I eat. And because I only eat about a meal a day. But, and according to all my doctors when I was a kid, I wasn't going to make it to 20.
How
And,
correct they are. They are so correct.
That was the secret, is that when I was about 14, I told my parents, I said, I'm not going to the doctor anymore. Even if I die, I'm not going to the doctor. And they said, okay. I was evidently sounded determined. And so, it saved me. I immediately started getting more healthy. But no, there's a lot of mysterious things that we don't know. We have not even a clue of. But the more you start living your life caring about other people, it will awaken you in ways. It will make you aware of things that you could not be aware of before. And that's what Christ was saying. The people live in darkness. They don't have the ears to hear or the eyes to see. Some people out there are going to start getting this. But Christ gave us the secret that if you lay down your life for others, for my sake, he says. And of course, Christ came to serve. Worship means to serve. If you do that, you'll be able to pick up your life more abundant. Because I've done that, information has come to me that can improve your health and improve my health. Discipline has come to me that doesn't even seem like discipline. It seems easy. And it turns your whole life around. But if you keep going the way that Cloward and Piven and the Communist Party want you to go, and the socialists want you to go, whatever you want to call it, socialism. I always thought it was funny that the socialists are fighting the communists, because Karl Marx said he was for democratic socialism because it leads to communism. But the reason they got them fighting in Germany, pre-Nazi Germany, is because when they started fighting one another, then they could bring out the troops to bring order. And I kind of have a feeling that is something that's going to come up. This is why we have so many of these armed groups from Iran and Venezuela and different places that are accumulating in small towns, sometimes in motels, sometimes in apartment buildings. We've heard a little bit of the news, but there's a lot more of that going on than that has been published in the news. So I can imagine that some sort of their insurrection in the community starts. And then American people who are decent, American people who want to see law and order, don't want to see people killed or abused, might bring out their guns and fight these guys that have been brought in here and are all over the country. And then that will give the governors like Newsom in California the license to take guns away from everybody, both sides. Oh, we had to bring peace. That's what they did in Germany when they got the communists and the socialists fighting one another. Then they had to bring peace because there was gunfire in the streets. So that's probably definitely on the agenda eventually, somewhere along the line. And of course, we know hundreds of thousands, maybe millions of people came in from China and Iraq and Iran, or claimed to be from these countries. And young men, military age. And we know, I've seen the senators in Congress saying that we have to put these people on they passed a bill, put them on a fast track to get them into the military. They flew them to military bases and they immediately joined the U.S. military. And they've got U.S. American uniforms now. And they're in the military. And they got U.S. guns now. So are they the Hessians that might be called upon to bring order in the streets if somebody brings disorder? No, you want to follow the strategy of Christ. You don't want a violent insurrection. I'm all for somebody owning a gun. That's fine with me. I mean, I've got a 100-year-old sword up there on the cabinet. I love guns. I love machinery. I love things like that. They're all tools. But that isn't going to be the solution. The solution is that we have to come together, find out who we can trust, find out who really cares about one another. Everybody's going to say they care. And in that process, we're going to come together. I raise sheep. That's one of the things I also do out on the desert. And like I said, I've told this, I may even told it on your program, that when I first brought sheep, I bought model sheep. They're a mix of farm flock sheep. And farm flocks have been in a fenced farm and fenced fields so long, they don't stick together. They're just interested in going from one field to the next, fill their belly. That's what they're interested in, because that's their pleasure. They want to go and fill their belly. And they'll have offspring and all that stuff, but they're not as interested in staying together. Range sheep that are out on the range, and our sheep, they wander over 1,000 acres out here on the desert, and they stay together. And we have cougars, we have wolves, we have coyotes, and the sheep stay together. I don't have to make them stay together. Those old black-faced sheep, they about run my legs off trying to get them to stay together. But range sheep, they don't live in a fenced field. And if one of them gets injured, they'll try to make room. If a coyote comes in the field, or a bobcat or a mountain lion comes in the field, they'll get in a circle and they'll all face the danger, and they'll put the young in the middle. Muskox do that out in the tundra. But Americans, if bad things come, they run every different direction. They want to fill their freezer. They want to fill their closet. The idea of sharing, well, I'm not going to share with them. And a lot of people you don't really want to share with. Oh, we took in a family just recently that were on hard times. They were all sick. We put them up. There was 8 in the family. They ate a lot. They were all but they only stayed here about 10 days and then supposedly got work somewhere else. But they don't really understand kingdom. And we helped them because they were clearly a need right there. But there will come a time where you can say, well, I'm sorry. I mean, this is what Jesus has parables about this. The foolish virgins. What's that all about? Is it really about virgins? What do they mean? That these are symbolic of something. And the foolish virgins are the people. See, they were this system of social welfare started by Herod and the Pharisees, which they refer to as Corban of the Pharisees. And they identify it with words like the leaven of Herod and the leaven of the Pharisees. The word leaven in Hebrew doesn't just mean yeast, it means cruelty or oppression. Their system of social welfare was based on forced offerings. So they identify it with the leaven of Herod. Well, the people who didn't sign up for that, they couldn't get any of those benefits, but they were free. This is why Jesus went to the Samaritans first, because nobody had gone to the Samaritans to try to get them to sign up to Herod's social welfare system, because the Samaritans were outside. They were kind of shunned by the Jewish elite. And Galilee wasn't signed up very heavy because it was a little bit different culture in Galilee. They had a thick, different accents, probably like going down to south or something. But Jesus got them signed up with John the Baptist system. Well, John the Baptist system didn't have any forced offerings. They had a network. And when you signed up with a baptism, see, Herod baptized people into his system. He had actually two systems he started. One through the temple in Jerusalem, the other one through the temple of Roma, which he also built. But that was for Romans. And for some Greeks, they would sign up for that. But it was still a social welfare system. And they got a number when they signed up for that. You didn't get a number when you signed up with John the Baptist, but you numbered yourselves. You organized in those tens, hundreds, and thousands. And so, but you also brought food when people needed it as a free will offering. It wasn't forced. You couldn't exercise authority one over the other. You couldn't take away the rights of your neighbor. You couldn't take away the bread of your neighbor. You had to hope that they would be there for you. This is why Christ is preaching faith, hope, and charity. Herod and the Pharisees were preaching force, fear, and fealty. You are subject. But you could be kicked out. And of course, Jesus got everybody who got the baptism of Jesus Christ kicked out. And they were operating a different system, rightly dividing the bread from house to house. Herod's system was starting to go bankrupt already. And the thing is, if you went to our time and said, well, who's doing that today? Well, I can tell you who did it yesterday, FDR. Said churches don't have to take care of the needy of your society anymore. The government will do it. Well, you can sign up for Social Security and you'll get a number. And they say, well, the Social Security payments will only be like 1.5%, maybe 2.5% at the most. It'll never go more than 3%. Well, of course, now it's over 15%. But there also says in there that there's another tax. And what it is that you're waiving a right to a portion of your labor. And that's where the income tax came from, on wages and salaries. It's through that Social Security system. And we write about it. We show you. I quote the book of the guy who invented the system, wrote it up. I quote his book because I read his book. I read the act. And then all the stuff that I wrote in the book Covenants of the Gods, I took to Washington, D.C. to Herbert Titus and Bob Olson, attorneys that have been in front of the Supreme Court hundreds of times. And they were blown away. They thought this is it. This is the answer. But it's not real popular because you got to take back your responsibility. You got to actually start taking care of one another. Because if you don't take care of one another, if you just want to come out of the system, that's what that family wanted to just come out of the system. Get rid of your Social Security number. I don't know if he did or not, but that's kind of the impression I got. But he ends up, he can't get work anywhere. And he can't feed his family. He's fine with other people feeding his family, but he can't feed them. He can't take care of them. But he has no idea that the kingdom of God is about a network. And this is how the early America worked. You were a Minuteman for your neighbor, not because you got drafted. You were a Minuteman for your neighbor because you cared about your neighbor. And you know that if you don't come to your neighbor when he's in trouble, he's not going to come for you when you're in trouble. They learned to stick together. When they first came over from Europe, they didn't quite have this. And we wrote articles to show you how they figured this out. Pilgrims and Strangers is one of the articles. but we've
Well,
forgotten it again.
yep.
And we
Very
forgot it
Andrew, you
because
said
we're dependent upon the government. Go ahead.
right. That's all. You said something that's very important. I've been saying this for a while now. Freedom comes with responsibility. We have obviously forgotten that. We want all the freebies, we want all the convenience, right? Government is our God, and this is why we've fallen apart. And that part I agree wholeheartedly.
Well,
But
it does come to the mind when you do that. You
right.
go ahead.
Yeah, I was gonna say one thing, and I know some of you who got different political orientations, so you know that's pro-government. I know some of you are agitated. I'm not going to use the P word, but you know it rhymes with hiss. But some of y'all are that, and I mean that's okay. This podcast is it's not a safe space. It's different points of views. I have some leftists, I have some right, I have some in the center, I have some Christians, some Muslim, whatever. This is not a safe space. And I don't want this to be a safe space. So if you're offended, if you want to tune out, that's fine. If you somehow survive this, if you hate this audio onslaught, I praise you for being brave at least, even though you're agitated. So that's what I'm gonna say. But it's true. We need to form a community. We need to help one another. We got to restore the culture of people. Ultimately, then that will transcend. We got to start with ourselves. It's Trump and Kamala is not gonna help you. Okay, I don't care where you lean politically. Some might do some good things. Some might do some bad things. Depending what you believe in. But at the end of the day, it has to start with us and form a community, and ideally start locally, then branch out nationally, and then we could go branch out internationally. Okay, but freedom comes with responsibility. There's a problem with this society is we want all the freedom and no responsibility. Doesn't work that way. Just doesn't work that way.
Yeah, I like to equate responsibility and rights as the two sides of the same coin. If you don't take back your responsibility, you will lose your rights. You won't be able to enforce it. I mean, like there was a lady, I think she's in Texas, and she just got elected to Congress, and she was one of those women who had a hairstylist place, and it was shut down for COVID, and they wouldn't let her open it up again. And her, the different hairdressers that work at the different stations, they said, we're not going to be able to pay our mortgage. We're not going to be able to feed our children if we don't get back to work. We're not getting any wages. And so she ended up opening up, and the judge said that was a selfish act, and put her in jail. And eventually, I guess Abbott said that she shouldn't be in jail, but then they were fining her like $500, I think, a day or something, for opening her deal. Well, now she's elected to, I don't know if it's state Congress or what, but she won the election in Texas. And that's great. But people, you saw it in a few places, but most of the places where people were losing their business and their life savings and the suicides. I have, one son who was monitoring the number of suicides. The government had guards. They didn't announce this, but I know it because of the people I know behind the scenes. Guards watching bridges in Oregon because there were so many people jumping off, and then they were keeping it a secret how many people were jumping off during COVID. I know people who committed suicide because it isn't natural for us to have nothing to do, no responsibility, no job or anything. It will drive you crazy. And so that responsibility, taking back that responsibility, sometimes it's a little difficult, but no pain, no gain. You have to do some heavy lifting. But to think community at the same time is absolutely essential to that, because sometimes you can't lift it up by yourself. You can't do it by yourself. You have to do it with others. I always tell people that seeking the kingdom of God and his righteousness, which the gospel tells us to do, is about taking back that responsibility on an individual basis. It's an individual quest alone. But we have to learn to do it together because it's just built into the nature of things. And if we don't do it together, we won't become strong as a community. And if we're not strong as a community, somebody will come in and shut down your business. We had a lot of businesses in here they tried to shut down in this county. And we didn't have to take out guns or anything like that. I know one instance where somebody was trying to shut down the only pharmacy in the county. We only have one in the whole county. I mean, this is thousands of square miles. And they wanted to shut down because they didn't think they were social distancing enough. And so they sent somebody down from the Capitol or someplace. And they were called down by somebody local. I think it was somebody in a real estate office. And my son got wind of it, and he just went over to the office and started knocking on the door. They locked the doors, and they hid in the back room because they didn't want to talk to him. And everybody opened up, and nobody got shut down. They threatened him a lot, but in this community, people would show up a lot more than you would see in the bigger towns. And when I say community, I'm talking countywide. And my son has seen this across, especially on Eastern Oregon side, the least populated side, is that people are coming and showing up for each other. They're starting to learn that that's what we need to do. But we're so far from what a free society requires that we really don't know how to do it yet. And one of the things that, the story of Egypt, we did a whole study on Egypt. It's all up available at Preparing You. You can look up, it's got a recording on every chapter. And we explain what Moses was really doing. They were in a system where 20% of their labor belonged to the government. That's what the bondage of Egypt was. And we were told never to go back to the bondage of Egypt where 20% of your labor belongs to the government. That's what the bondage of Egypt. It says that right there. 1/5 of your labor belonged to the Pharaoh, which it represents the whole government. And we were never to return it. And when Moses took them out of that, he created a system of free will offerings. It says right there in Leviticus, all your offerings had to be free will. And the people who administered those offerings were this group he called out to be the Levites. And you only gave to them according to their service. They didn't do any service, you didn't give to them. It was a free government. That's what he was establishing. We have a lot of misconceptions. People think they were stoning people and putting people to death. We showed that's not what the word said. That's not what they mean. But anyway, our study on Exodus, Moses is coming to, I just expanded some of our pages. Who was Moses in real life? Some people don't even think he existed. I have statues of him. I can show you what he looked like. But you have to his name wasn't Moses. They just called him Moses. And they say that right in the Bible. That's not his name. So what was his name? Well, you have to read the article to find out. But anyway, he when he said, let my people go, he was the rightful Pharaoh. He could take those people out. But he went and asked the guy who was sitting in the position of Pharaoh, who wasn't the rightful Pharaoh. We explained that. To give permission. And you kind of wonder, wait a minute. God hardens the heart of the Pharaoh so that he wouldn't let the people go. He took away their benefits. They weren't going to get any more straw, which is actually a metaphor for benefits. You have to remember the social welfare was taken care of through the temple. That's why there were granaries at the temple. If the floods didn't come and the people were going to starve, they had the grain stored up to feed the people. That's what they did in Sumer with the turtle dove goddess of Sumer. That was the goddess of welfare. But the question is, are you filling and providing that welfare through charity, or are you providing it through force? If you're providing it through force, you will degenerate the people. You will break down the bonds of society. So the Pharaoh's heart was hardened, and they had to take care of one another, still pay their tally of bricks, and that was creating the bonds in the network. So when the day came that they had to leave, they were ready for freedom. A lot of Americans aren't ready for freedom. So this is why we tell people to join the network. And people say, well, if you build it, they will come. I tell you, if you build it, you'll be there already. The network is people learning to trust one another. Well, you don't have to trust one another. You have to learn how to do that. And everybody who comes won't be trustworthy. A lot of them are foolish virgins. And like I said, I started telling that story, the foolish virgins. They didn't invest in one another. They just went off and did their own dancing thing. And when the time where they needed to come into the feast, the door was shut and locked, and they couldn't come in. So this is why I say that there's hard times coming in America. It's very clear. Anybody who watches the 6 o'clock news should be able to figure it out. I mean, you're trillions of dollars of debt. Countries all over the world are about ready to completely dump the dollar. Even Putin came out and said, I don't want to, but you're making me do it. I want to keep using the dollar, but you're making me dump it and get with these other people. I don't trust them as much as I trust America.
Yeah, you're referring to, I think, what's the economic alliance? BRICS?
Oh, yeah,
BRICS,
that's one of them. But BRICS isn't the only one.
No, right. The
Yeah.
petrodollar with the Saudis, that's another one.
Right. There's
there's
several
many
of them.
others.
And
Yeah.
even those that are getting together and doing this, they will probably divide off too. It's kind of like OPEC. OPEC was going to control the price of oil, and they were all cheating on one another. So, and I'm not again, like right now, Iran is causing all kinds of trouble. It's not Iranians. I know Iranians. There's some bad Iranians out there, but there's some Iranians they're really good people. And they'd make good Americans, and they ought to come here. But the leadership isn't what it ought to be. Well, in America, the leadership hasn't been what it ought to be either. So I don't want to group people into, Iranians or Jews or Russians or whatever. You got to deal with everybody on an individual basis. That's why, you can join the network if you live in Russia. You probably can't in China because of the censorship in China, but we cover China.
Unless
But
they do it underground, but that's kind of snitching
yeah,
off.
there's an underground church in China, and a lot of them have survived because they're doing kind of what we're already doing. The underground church in China knew that it had the network, and that's how they survived. But the whole world is going to go through turmoil. There's just no two ways about it, because there's a lot of people controlling. You got names like BlackRock and all these different institutions that own each other and all this kind of stuff. They could collapse the economy by themselves. But the fact is that there's a lot of predators out there. You just have to come together. And early Americans, they were all starving. The Pilgrims were starving. People in Jamestown were starving every year. And then they finally realized they stopped this socialism thing, because they all started out as socialists, a common storehouse. From each according to their ability, to each according to their need. Doesn't work. If you produce it, you have total control over it. But if you don't share it, you won't have a community. But learning to share. I know a lot of people that are very sharing. They'll give you the shirt off their back. Well, if they do that too much, they'll freeze to death in the winter. They have to learn, even John the Baptist said, if you have 2 coats and your neighbor has none, share. Well, you have to be organized in that, because there's a lot of guys that will come by and they'll say, oh, we're poor, we don't have any money. And they may have more money than you. And you don't know, because they're just there claiming to be, they're the foolish virgins. They didn't come together so we get to know who you are when things are good. And so we don't know how to be a community, a real community with our own communion. We don't know who we can trust and who we can't trust. And this is what Christ and John the Baptist before him were trying to teach the people how to do. And John the Baptist didn't just do it in Judea. He had done it in Parthia before he came there. And we have to learn that too. And so anyway, that's why we have the website preparingyou.com. You can go there. There's network links. People can go and sign up. It doesn't cost you any money. It's just an email group. But then once you're on an email group in your geographical area, Oregon, wherever you're at, then you can get to meet other people, and then you can form congregations, and then they can become congregations of record. But everything it's about empowering you to make choices for you. But if you only make choices for your benefit, you're not going to ever form a community. Eventually, you have to make some choices for the benefit of others. That's how you create those bonds. There's an old story about, where they needed to weave a rope to moor a ship that could be sucked into a whirlpool. And they wove it out of the hair of virgins. And of course, this is all symbolic. It's old Norse folktale. But it's actually what they're talking about. They use that word virgins and fornicators. Fornicators were people, Paul tells us this. Fornicators were people who were engaged in covetous practices. And he said, covetousness is idolatry. So if you're going to men who exercise authority to get benefits at your neighbor's expense through those men who exercise authority, that is idolatry. Everybody thinks idolatry is that we've set up some sort of statue and bow down to it. And we talked about it before as the golden calf. That was a central bank. They just put it all in a statue so that you could make sure nobody was robbing the bank. But if they needed extra funds in Athens and a lot of other places that had these golden statues, they actually sawed off chunks of the statue to make coins to fund, the defense of the city.
Yeah.
That's what a central bank was. Well, there ain't nothing left in Fort Knox. You made your golden calf way back in 1916 and 1920 and 1930. They've already taken all the gold and silver out of your pockets. And even now they repealed HJR 192 that took gold. That was that made people have to give in their gold. U.S. citizens had to give in their gold. I particularly say you can only do this for U.S. citizens. And this was back in the 30s. Well, they've repealed HJR 192 with Public Law 95-147. You'll write this down. But anyway, we cover it on the website.
Yep.
But if you own gold and silver now and you've got it in your home or in your fire safe or whatever, you only got legal title to it. And you probably don't know the definition of legal title. You got legal title to your house. You don't own it. They can take it away. You got legal title to your labor. They can take it away from you. You're back in the bondage of Egypt. And you got the number to prove it. Now, I'm not telling people to get out of the system. I'm telling you to seek the alternative. That's what they had to do in Egypt. That's what they had to do when they went back to these similar systems with Solomon and others, because it weakens the people. You want to be range sheep. You want to be used to not being fenced in and still sticking together. And then you may need a couple of good shepherds, but a good shepherd is not
right. Yeah. Now you said a lot. I think this
So
is
I heard
good.
you say something, but I didn't
No.
catch it.
I'm just saying this is a good time to cut. You said a lot. I think this is more than enough that the people bargain for, especially those who hate the message, are pro-government, pro-socialist. You already agitated them. Oh, well,
Well,
you can't please everybody.
I'm all for voluntary socialism. I just don't want to give the power to anybody to force the contributions of me or my neighbor. If
Right,
you
right.
Jesus said, if you take a bite out of one another, he says, he warns us not to take a bite out of one another, lest ye be devoured. Well, that's the trillions of dollars in debt.
Right.
Peter says, covetous practices will make you merchandise. Human resources is another way to translate that, where you have to work and they don't have to pay you. They can take away 20%, 30%, 40%, 50%. They can take it all
All of
away
it.
and still make you work because you belong to them and you got a number to prove it. Now, I don't want to be pessimistic about it. The solution is, what am I actually saying? We said take back your responsibility. What is your responsibility? What is the definition of religion? We'll leave it at this. If I don't even have any idea what the time is, but the definition of religion 200 years ago when they made the Constitution was the pious performance of your duty to God and your fellow man. So you have a duty to your fellow man. If he falls into a pit, if he is starving, if a hurricane comes and washes his house away, you have a duty to go and help him. What's your duty to God? To love your neighbor as yourself. Moses said it. Abraham said it. Jesus said it. If all the Muslims were doing what Abraham was doing, and all the Jews were doing what Moses was doing originally, and all the Christians were doing what Jesus Christ said to do, we wouldn't need Trump. We wouldn't have all these problems. But unfortunately, we're not. We're doing what some person who is a blind guide told you. My eyes are open. So anyway, we like I say, people can join us on X, our afternoon program on Saturday. People can call in, and then we have a program on morning. But it's all at preparingyou.com or hisholychurch.org, and join the network.
Well, I'm going to put all that in the description. His website and prepareyou.com, the social medias, all that. No, this is very valuable stuff. Look, if you're lost in life, look, maybe this is the direction that you needed. That's all I'm going to say. I hope you take what he's saying to heart, because I think this is the way to heal the true epidemic of America, the scattering of the flock. That's the real epidemic. Not this little virus. Yeah, it's an epidemic, but the real epidemic is scattered flock. We don't trust each other. We are perfect savages. That's the real epidemic. Let's spin that. Okay? We got to restore that. God is the way, okay? And I'm just going to say that. It's coming for someone who pretended to be atheist because I was mad at God because I don't understand him, okay? So just do that. Check out his website, social medias, and he's a smart guy. He's not just speaking gobbledygook. He's definitely not. It can be easily backed up through documents. You want proof, right? You want evidence. Well, he gave you plenty of that. All right? And trust me, he could talk for another 20 hours, but I'm going to stop him and myself there. I'm pretty sure I don't have that endurance. My max is 3 on a good day. So just take his word to heart. And for those of you who are agitated, well, go to therapy, pray to God, meditate, something. That's all I can say, because this is not a safe zone. And I don't want it to be a safe zone. So, from wherever you start listening to this podcast, you have a blessed day, afternoon, or night.